The night sky was calm, a quiet stretch of stars blinking like old lanterns scattered across an endless dark ocean. And on the edge of that silence, the colony known as EOS-5 waited, unaware that this would be the last peaceful night it would ever see. The colony sat on the surface of a cold moon, its glowing towers rising like fragile glass candles in the darkness, and inside, families slept while machines worked quietly in the background. No one expected war here. EOS-5 was a mining colony, not a battlefield. It was a place where children learned, workers mined resources, and traders passed through. It was quiet, safe, and too far from any danger, or so they believed. High above the colony, orbit scanners suddenly caught something strange. A lone technician, tired and half asleep, stared at the screen as small dots began appearing, one after another, moving fast from the dark side of the system. At first he thought it was a glitch. Then the dots grew bigger. They were ships. Hundreds of them. His hand froze on the console as the system alarm screamed across the control room. The technician whispered to himself, his voice shaking. "They're coming." The warning lights turned the colony red. Sirens echoed through every street. And sleeping families rushed outside, confused and frightened. The governor's voice came over the speakers, calm but cold. "All citizens, shelter protocol now." "Repeat, shelter protocol." But even as she spoke, something cracked in the sky. The stars disappeared behind a black wall. The fleet was here. No one recognized the design. The ships were smooth, curved, like living creatures rather than machines, and they moved in perfect silence, not a single engine sound, only the soft hum of something ancient. The defense towers tried to power up, but the system failed. Screens went black. The colony's network went dark in seconds, as if someone had reached in and shut everything down with one touch. Panic spread fast. Parents grabbed their children, soldiers ran to their posts, and the governor stared at the sky, realizing she was looking at something humanity had never seen before. A single message broke through the static on every screen, written in clean, perfect English. It said only 4 words, "Your test begins now." Then came the light. A beam of pale white energy struck the far side of the colony, cutting through towers like paper. The sound followed seconds later, a deep, heavy roar that shook the moon's crust. Dust and fire rose into the air. People screamed, trying to run, but the beam kept moving, calm and precise, destroying everything in its path. Unlike normal weapons, it didn't leave fire or smoke. It left silence. Where buildings once stood, there was nothing but smooth, black ground, as if reality had been erased. The colony's security forces tried to launch fighters, but the ships never reached the sky. Something invisible hit them before they could leave the ground, crushing metal like tin foil. Soldiers watched helplessly as their own ships were folded into nothing. The governor shouted for evacuation, but the power grid was already gone. The attackers didn't speak, didn't demand, didn't negotiate. They simply moved forward with a cold, silent plan. In one of the underground shelters, a small group of civilians huddled together, listening to the sounds above. A young woman held her little brother tight as the ceiling trembled. An old man whispered that maybe this was just an attack, maybe help would come from Earth. But the technician from the control tower knew the truth. He had seen the signal. He had seen how fast it moved. Earth wouldn't have time to send anyone. This wasn't war. It was something bigger. Above, the alien fleet spread across the sky like a dark storm. One of the larger ships released a pulse of light that covered the colony in seconds. Every electronic system shut down. Art monitors, communication links, even basic lights failed. It felt as if the moon itself had been muted. People stood in darkness, holding each other, waiting for the sound of their world ending. But instead of fire, they heard whispers. The sound was low at first, like wind blowing through an empty canyon. Then it grew louder, clearer, and it came from everywhere. Inside buildings, inside helmets, inside their own heads. A language no one had ever heard was speaking directly into their minds. Panic turned into terror as some began to scream, covering their ears though there was nothing to block. The message wasn't asking for surrender. It was counting. Slowly, one number after another, the alien ships hovered low now, their shapes finally visible. They looked almost like giant black wings stretching across the sky, and between them, strange lights flickered like breathing lungs. One of the defense officers, shaking with fear, tried to fire an old manual cannon. The blast lit the sky for a second, but the beam from the alien ship didn't even flinch. It simply turned, focused on the weapon, and erased it from existence. No explosion, no sound. Just gone. The governor tried to make contact with the fleet. She stood in the control room surrounded by smoke, blood, and fear. "This is Governor Hale of EOS 5, she said into the dead comms. "We surrender. Please talk to us." There was no reply. Only the same 4 words appeared again on the main screen. "Your test begins now," and then the colony lights went out. Everything was swallowed by blackness. In that single minute, more than 5,000 souls disappeared. The sky was filled with ships, the ground was filled with silence, and humanity realized too late that this was not a war it could fight. It was a message, but no one yet understood what it meant or who had sent it. The only thing they knew was that everything changed the moment the stars went dark. The rescue ship drifted toward EOS 5 like a ghost in the night, its hull catching the faint blue light of distant stars. Inside the command deck, the crew stared through the main viewport, searching for movement, life, anything at all. But the colony below was dead. No lights, no signals, no sound. Just black towers and endless silence. Commander Rian leaned forward in his chair, his voice low but steady. "Open the channels again. There has to be someone left." The comms officer shook her head slowly. "I've tried all frequencies. It's like the entire network's been erased." Those words hung heavy in the air, filling the room with an invisible weight. They had received the distress signal just 12 hours ago, a strange, repeating message from above the colony. It wasn't coming from any ground beacon. It came from the sky itself. That alone was wrong. Now, as their scanners swept the surface, they saw no bodies, no fires, no signs of a battle. Just perfect, terrifying silence. The pilot adjusted their orbit, gliding closer. As the ship descended, they saw the black marks on the ground. Long, smooth scars cutting across the colony in perfect lines. No bomb could make marks like that. When the landing crew stepped out, the air was still and cold, the kind of cold that didn't just freeze your skin. It crept into your bones. Their boots echoed across empty streets. Houses were open, lights dead, tables still set as if everyone had just stood up and walked away. A half-eaten meal lay on one table. A child's toy lay in the dirt, untouched. The silence was so thick it felt alive. One of the soldiers whispered, "Where are they?" But no one answered. They moved through the colony slowly, their flashlights cutting through the dark like small knives. Not a single bird, not a single breeze. Even the wind had disappeared. And then the technician found the first screen still working, an old security monitor in a broken store window. It flashed with a single line of text over and over, "We are waiting." The words glowed softly, like they weren't written by human hands. The commander ordered a full perimeter scan. Drones lifted off and flew high into the air, sending data back to the ship. But halfway through the sweep, the signal froze. All 5 drones stopped transmitting at the exact same moment. A deep static filled the comms. The crew back on the ship tried to reboot the feed, but something was wrong. The static wasn't random. It had rhythm, like breathing. Above the colony, the clouds shifted in slow, unnatural movements. Something was hiding in them. The scanners caught a faint shape, almost invisible, moving slowly above the rooftops. The pilot adjusted the angle, zooming in, and the screen flickered. A black, curved structure hung in the sky like a silent moon, blending perfectly with the darkness. No engines, no lights, no sound. Just a massive shadow watching them. Inside the colony's main tower, they found the power core room intact. But all the systems were locked by an unknown code. The commander tried bypassing it, but the screens flashed with strange symbols that rearranged themselves every second. Then the screen went black. One word appeared in perfect English, "Hello. One of the younger soldiers stepped back, whispering, "It knows we're here." His voice trembled. The commander ordered everyone to stay calm, but even he could feel the weight pressing down on them. This was not a simple attack. Something intelligent was still here. Something that had been waiting. As night fell across the colony, the rescue ship's floodlights lit the streets like pale blue fire. The shadow in the clouds did not move. It just watched. Every so often, the static in their headsets pulsed, almost like a heartbeat. One of the engineers noticed the signal wasn't coming from the surface at all. It was coming from directly above the colony, from that dark shape. Back on the bridge, the comms officer worked frantically, trying to send a warning to Terran Command. The message kept bouncing back. When she opened the return file, she froze. The voice coming through was her own, repeating her message word for word in the exact same tone. She dropped her headset, her hands shaking. "It's copying us," she whispered. The commander stepped outside, staring up at the black sky. He felt a pressure. A sound too low to hear, but deep enough to make his chest tighten. The air itself felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. This wasn't a war, he muttered to himself. It was a clean sweep. Suddenly, the colony's lights flickered for the first time since they landed. Every building lit up at once, showing the same message on every screen, wall and sign. "We are waiting." The lights were cold and white, not like human power. The soldiers raised their rifles, scanning the shadows, but there was no one there. Just the message. Then, slowly, the clouds above the colony began to split. A faint glow, like a crack in the sky, widened. The dark shape started to move, not down but around them, like it was surrounding the entire colony. The commander yelled for the crew to regroup, but the ground shook as a deep sound rolled through the air. Not an explosion, not thunder, but something older, heavier, like the heartbeat of something alive. The pilot back on the ship tried to lift off, but the engines failed without warning. The ship hung in the air, dead. Systems were locked, overridden by something that wasn't human. The crew on the ground looked up as a beam of pale light slowly stretched down from the dark shape above, touching the center of the colony like a finger pointing at prey. No one dared move. The light didn't burn. It didn't destroy. It just hovered, waiting. And in that moment, everyone realized the truth. They were not rescuing anyone. They had walked straight into something that had already decided their fate. Something far bigger than war. Something that had been waiting in the silence long before they arrived. The wind above the colony turned sharp and thin, as if the air itself had learned to hold its breath. Every soldier on the ground stared at the pale beam of light hanging over the center of EOS 5. It didn't flicker or move. It just floated there, silent and calm, like a finger pointing from the sky, and everyone felt it wasn't light at all. It was looking at them. Commander Rian's heart pounded hard in his chest as he slowly raised his helmet visor to get a clearer view. The light wasn't coming from a ship's engine. It was coming from something alive. Back on the rescue ship, the pilot tried one more time to restart the thrusters. The system screen showed normal power flow for a split second. Then all the numbers twisted into strange shapes, like someone had reached inside the ship and bent the language itself. The engines shut down without a sound. At the same time, every helmet on the ground made a soft click. The comms had gone silent. No chatter, no static. Just emptiness. One of the soldiers, a young man barely out of training, whispered nervously, "Commander, it's listening to us." But the commander didn't answer. He felt it too. A pressure in the back of his head. Not pain, just presence. Something was there, sitting quietly inside their skulls, listening to every breath they took. And then, like a whisper through a wall, a sound began to slide into their ears. It started faint, just a thin hum, almost like wind through old metal. Then it grew clearer, sharper, becoming something that wasn't language and yet was. The message pressed directly into their thoughts, and each of them heard the same phrase at the exact same time: "Do not run." The words were calm, too calm, like something ancient was speaking for the first time in a very long time. The youngest soldier dropped his rifle, panic flashing in his eyes, but no one dared move. The air was heavy, the shadows around the buildings longer than they should have been, and the light above the colony started to change shape. Twisting slowly like it was alive, Ryan forced himself to take a step forward.
"Who are you?"
he shouted into the empty air. His voice echoed through the streets, but nothing answered. Then every window in the colony turned bright white. A line of text burned across each surface. "We heard you." Back on the ship, the sensor officer saw something the others didn't. The black shape above the colony wasn't just hovering anymore, it was expanding. Or maybe it had always been that big, hidden by the darkness, waiting for them to step inside. The edges of the shape moved like smoke, curling around the entire settlement. It was a ship, but not like any ship they had ever seen. It had no engines, no lights, no clear structure. It looked more like a shadow wearing the sky as a mask. One of the engineers tried sending a signal to Terran Command through an emergency frequency, the kind that bypassed most electronic interference. For 3 seconds, the transmission was clear. Then it came back, not as a reply, but as a perfect recording of his own voice, repeated slowly, like a mirror that could speak. His eyes widened. "It's inside the transmission," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's inside everything." On the ground, the pale beam of light finally moved. It slid across the colony like a blade through fog. Every place it touched grew silent, not just quiet, but completely void of sound. The soldiers realized that even their own footsteps were fading when they stepped into the edge of the light. It wasn't just looking at them. It was erasing the world around them one piece at a time. Ryan ordered the team to fall back toward the landing zone, but when they turned the corner, they froze. The black shape in the sky had lowered just enough for them to see its surface. It was covered in smooth, moving lines, like veins of cold silver flowing under black glass. A single circular opening formed slowly in the center. Not a door, an eye. And it was staring straight down at them. The technician on the ship screamed over the comms as the cameras zoomed in. "Commander, it's scanning us. Every system's being read like an open book. It knows who we are, what we are, everything." His voice was shaking now, words breaking between breaths. The comms crackled for a heartbeat. Then a new voice entered the channel, a voice that wasn't human. It spoke slowly, clearly, and in perfect English. "Do not run." "You asked?" We answered. Panic spread like wildfire. 2 soldiers bolted for the ship, sprinting through the dark street. But as they reached the edge of the light, their bodies froze mid-step. They didn't fall. They didn't scream. They just stopped moving, trapped like statues made of flesh. Their eyes were still open. Breathing stopped. And then, like dust on the wind, they were gone. No sound. No remains. Nothing. Ryan clenched his jaw, fighting the instinct to run. "This is not a war," he whispered. "This is something else." His second-in-command stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Then what is it?" The commander looked up at the black sky, at the silent, watching shape, and said, "It's not attacking us. It's waiting." The pale beam lifted slowly, pulling itself back toward the shadow. As it disappeared into the darkness, the colony's lights turned off again. For a few long seconds, there was only silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes breathing feel wrong. Then every speaker, every radio, every system on the ship came alive with the same single phrase, "Follow." The commander felt his hands tremble for the first time. The enemy, or whatever it was, didn't need weapons to control them. It had already decided their next move. In that cold silence, every human on EOS 5 understood one thing with painful clarity. They weren't facing something they could fight. They were standing at the beginning of something much bigger, something that had been watching humanity long before this night. And now it had finally chosen to speak. The night on EOS 5 felt like it had no end, a long black ocean stretching over the colony, as if the stars themselves had hidden behind the darkness. The rescue team moved through the empty streets with flashlights that suddenly felt too small, their pale beams shaking with every step. No one spoke. After what they had seen, the soldiers vanishing without a sound, the voice echoing inside their heads, they all felt the same cold weight sitting on their chests. The commander's boots crunched against the frozen ground as he led them toward the old control tower. He wasn't sure why. Maybe instinct. Maybe because some part of him believed that if any answers existed, they would be up there. The doors to the tower were wide open, swinging slowly in the breeze, though there was no wind. Inside, the lights were out, and the long hallways smelled of dust and silence. They climbed the metal stairs carefully, flashlights flicking from wall to wall, revealing old posters, scattered papers, and broken screens. Halfway up, the youngest soldier stopped. His breathing grew fast. "Commander, do you hear that?" Everyone froze. At first, there was nothing. Then softly, a humming sound slid through the air. Not mechanical, not human. It sounded like someone humming a lullaby. As they reached the top, they found the source. In the middle of the control room sat a little girl on the floor, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing a torn silver nightgown. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, her face hidden in her arms. She wasn't crying. She wasn't moving. She was just sitting there, humming to herself like the world outside didn't exist. Ryan stepped forward slowly, raising a hand to show he meant no harm. "Hey, it's okay," he whispered, though even he didn't believe that. "We're here to help." The girl lifted her head. Her face was pale, almost too pale, and her eyes looked strange in the dim light, not afraid, not broken, just distant. She tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something far away. "You came late," she said softly. Her voice echoed strangely, like two voices overlapping, one human, and one something else. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. The commander knelt down, keeping his voice gentle. "Where is everyone? Where did they go?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she slowly raised one arm and pointed toward the ceiling. Through the metal, through the clouds, toward the black shadow still circling above the colony. Her hand shook, not with fear, but like she could feel something moving up there. "They took them," she whispered. "They took them all. But they left a message." The technician rushed to the control panels, trying to pull any data from the dead system. The screens flickered, black to white, and then a single symbol appeared. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a number. Just a simple circle with lines stretching outward like a sun. But then, slowly, one line of text appeared beneath it. "She knows." The girl flinched as if the message was being spoken directly to her. Her small hands grabbed her head. "They're talking," she whispered, rocking slightly. They never stopped talking. The crew's comms clicked, and a whisper slid into their ears again. "Follow." It was the same voice as before, calm, ancient, not rushing. It didn't sound angry. It sounded like it was simply waiting for them to catch up. The commander's second-in-command stepped closer to the girl, kneeling beside her. "Who are they?" he asked carefully. The girl's eyes lifted slowly. This time they weren't pale. A faint white glow flickered behind her pupils, like a light trapped deep inside. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "They were never gone. They were above us the whole time." The comms officer gasped as the main tower's radio console came to life on its own. A bright blue waveform appeared, pulsing in perfect rhythm with the girl's heartbeat. The ancient voice spoke again, not through the air, but through their skulls. "She carries the key." Ryan's throat tightened. Whatever was in the sky wasn't just watching them. It had left her here on purpose. She wasn't a survivor. She was part of the message. A low rumble filled the air, shaking the windows of the tower. Outside, the shadow above the colony grew brighter around its edges, the pale light slowly expanding like a second dawn. The soldiers moved to the windows and froze. The entire colony was glowing faintly now, not with fire, not with energy, but with something they couldn't explain. The black lines across the ground began to pulse like veins, all leading toward the central plaza. The commander's heart began to race as he realized it wasn't a weapon sight. It was a doorway. The girl stood up suddenly, her voice steady now. "They want you to see," she said, no longer sounding like a child. Her eyes burned with that soft light, and she walked toward the exit without fear, barefoot on the cold floor. The crew followed her down the stairs, their footsteps echoing in a rhythm that wasn't their own. It felt like the colony itself was guiding them. Outside, the pale beam from the shadow above had changed. It wasn't pointing anymore, it was pulling. Dust rose gently from the ground, swirling like a quiet storm. Every device on the rescue ship began to power on by itself. Screens filled with the same glowing symbol they saw in the tower. The word "Come" appeared, stretching across every panel in perfect sync. The girl stopped in the middle of the plaza, directly beneath the light, and raised her face to the sky. She wasn't afraid. She looked like she'd been waiting for this moment since the beginning. The commander shouted for her to step back, but his voice didn't carry. It vanished into the air like it had been swallowed. The shadow above the colony shifted, its edges rippling like black water. A ring of light formed slowly around it, wider and wider, until it covered the entire colony like an eye opening for the first time. The girl whispered one final sentence, barely louder than the wind. "They're coming back." And then the ground trembled, not with violence, but with purpose. Something vast and unseen was about to reveal itself, and the rescue crew understood that they were no longer in control of anything. The real encounter hadn't even begun. It was only opening its eyes. The air above the colony tightened like a drawn bow, and everyone could feel it, not just on their skin but deep inside their bones. The rescue team stood frozen in the plaza, staring up at the massive ring of light forming in the sky. The girl was at the center, her bare feet planted on the blackened ground, her white glowing eyes locked on the heavens. No one dared touch her. No one dared speak. The wind moved around her, as if she belonged to whatever was watching them. Commander Ryan felt sweat run down his back, but the night air was freezing cold. Something in him whispered that if they interrupted whatever this was, they wouldn't live long enough to understand what had happened to the colony. The ring of light began to pulse softly, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to any living creature. The sound didn't travel through the air, it moved through them. Their chests vibrated with each slow pulse, as if the world was breathing in perfect rhythm with something above the stars. Then for the first time since they'd landed, the voice returned, clearer, stronger, and everywhere at once. It wasn't coming through their radios anymore. It was inside their heads. "You heard us," it said. "Now you will see." The girl tilted her head back, her arms lifting slowly, not like a child anymore, but like someone obeying a command. Her voice echoed through the plaza, soft but steady. "They left this place behind," she whispered, "but not empty. It's a door." The ground beneath them shifted. The black lines that ran through the streets and buildings began to glow. White, then blue, like rivers of light spreading out from the plaza. Every structure lit up at once, and for a brief moment, EOS 5 looked alive again, but it wasn't human life that returned. The air grew warmer. A low hum rose from the ground, wrapping around the rescue crew like an invisible tide. The shadow in the sky began to move, not closer, but open. The ring of light above stretched wider and wider, its center swirling like a storm. The black surface of the massive ship twisted, revealing layers beneath it, structures, towers, movements that looked less like machines and more like something breathing. A single line of light extended from the ring straight down to the girl. It touched her forehead gently, and she didn't flinch. Her glow intensified until her small frame was wrapped in white fire. The comms officer stumbled backward, her heart hammering. "Commander," she whispered, her voice trembling, "this isn't just a signal, it's a message." The voice returned, louder now, deep and calm, like a mountain speaking. This was not a war, it was a test. The words burned through their minds like a slow, unstoppable tide. The technician on the rescue ship scrambled to the console, trying to record the signal, but the screens filled with moving symbols, rewriting themselves faster than he could track. He didn't even understand the data, because it wasn't made for humans to understand. It was just shown. In the plaza, the girl opened her mouth, and another voice came out. It wasn't hers. It was layered, sharp and smooth all at once, echoing in every direction. They took them because they passed. They left me because you haven't. Ryan's stomach turned cold. The realization struck hard. This was never about saving anyone. This was a message meant for them. The colonists weren't victims. They were chosen. The soldier closest to the girl took one nervous step forward, hand half raised as if he could stop whatever was happening. The ground around him cracked, not like breaking stone, but like something alive had flexed beneath the surface. Blue light crawled up from the cracks and wrapped around his boots, holding him in place like roots. He struggled, shouting, but the more he fought, the deeper the light pulled him down. His scream vanished into silence as the light consumed him. The others stepped back in terror, but Ryan didn't move. His mind was spinning too fast. "Why us?" he whispered to the air. "Why now?" The answer came like a blade sliding across glass. "Because you asked." Back on the ship, alarms lit up without warning. The entire vessel was lifting into the air, even though no engines were on. Something had taken control. The pilot screamed into the comm, "We're not flying this. Something's dragging us." The ring in the sky had become a tunnel of light, swirling endlessly upward. The girl, now glowing like a burning star, lifted slowly off the ground, weightless. She wasn't fighting it. She was leading them. The voice echoed again, stronger this time. "You wanted to find us. Now you will follow." The commander turned toward his crew. Their faces were pale and wet with sweat, their hands shaking, but they all knew there was no choice. They couldn't fight what they didn't understand. And whatever this was, it wasn't just watching. It was pulling them in. The wind roared. As the rescue ship rose into the tunnel of light, its hull glowing like it had been marked. The ground shook with the weight of something unseen waking up. The girl reached the center of the beam and disappeared into it, her body swallowed by white fire, without a scream, without fear. Every system on the rescue ship went dead. The last thing the crew heard before the world went white was the voice whispering like a distant storm, "You are next." And then everything disappeared into light. The world returned in a way that didn't make sense. There was no sky, no ground, no air, just a soft white light that seemed to stretch forever, weightless and silent. "Commander." Ryan felt the deck of the rescue ship beneath his boots, but it didn't feel like it was flying through space. It felt like it was hanging inside a dream. The hum around them wasn't mechanical anymore. It was deep, slow, steady like the heartbeat of something alive and enormous. The crew looked out the viewport expecting stars, but there were none. Instead, a shape moved in the distance. It wasn't a planet or a ship. It was something bigger. The black shadow that had hovered over EOS 5 was now fully revealed. It wasn't a single structure. It was an entire city floating in the void. Towers that weren't really towers, lights that weren't really lights, shapes that folded and unfolded like they were breathing. Every piece of it seemed to be alive, not built. The voice that had haunted them since they arrived returned, not inside their heads this time, but from everywhere around them, filling the white space like an invisible ocean. "Now you will see." The ship began to move on its own, gliding toward the living city. The pilot slammed uselessly at the controls, panic flashing in his eyes. But nothing responded. The voice didn't need their permission. It had already decided their path. As they neared the structure, windows slid open along its surface like black petals, revealing a soft, golden light inside. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cold. It just was. Ryan and his crew stepped out of the airlock, expecting to fall, but they didn't. The surface beneath their feet shifted and molded itself like it was welcoming them. The girl stood at the center of the platform, her nightgown untouched. her hair floating slightly as if underwater. Her eyes no longer held a faint glow, they burned bright white now. When she spoke, her voice wasn't hers anymore. "They left me so you would come," she said softly. "You asked to find them." "You did." The commander stared at her, the questions crashing in his mind too fast to speak. "Where are the colonists?" He finally managed. Her head tilted slightly, and then the voice came again. Not hers, but theirs, layered, powerful. "They are not gone. They are above. They are becoming." The crew exchanged terrified looks. The surface around them pulsed gently like a heartbeat. One of the soldiers, shaking, whispered, "What does that mean?" "Becoming what?" The living city responded before the girl could. A wave of golden light rippled through the floor, and walls of soft black glass rose slowly around them. Images appeared, moving images that weren't screens, but memories. They saw the colonists standing in the plaza before it all happened. Not terrified, not fighting, just waiting. They were looking at the sky with calm faces as the beam touched them. And then their bodies dissolved into particles of light, floating upward like dust caught in sunlight. The commander felt his throat tighten. "They went willingly," he muttered. "They understood," the voice replied. "This was not war. This was invitation." The technician fell to his knees, shaking his head. "They took them and turned them into this," he whispered, looking around at the living walls. And it made a terrible kind of sense. The colony hadn't been destroyed. It had been emptied. The people weren't dead. They were here, inside this thing. The girl walked closer, barefoot, her small steps making no sound. "You kept asking the sky if someone was out there," she said softly. "They heard you, but you never thought about the answer." The walls around them opened like unfolding wings, and for the first time they saw what lay above the city. Countless streams of white light rose like rivers into the distance, each one made of flickering shapes, faces, memories, thoughts. Rian recognized some of them. People from the colony. Their voices were not screams. They were singing in a language no human knew. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. The voice filled the air again. "You call it first contact. We call it awakening. They are not prisoners. They are part of us now. They chose." Ryan's hand shook. He couldn't tell if it was fear or something else. "We didn't choose," he said quietly. "But you came." That answer struck him like a knife. They hadn't been forced. They had followed the signal willingly. Curiosity, hope, a desperate need to know what waited in the dark. And now they were standing in it. The soldier closest to the commander stepped back, his voice rising. "We're not joining you," he shouted at the girl, at the city, at whatever was listening. "We're going back." But the living floor moved like a wave beneath him. Light wrapped around his legs, holding him still. The city didn't threaten. It didn't shout. It simply waited. The girl looked up at them, her bright eyes calm. "You can't go back," she whispered. "Once you've seen the door, you can't pretend it isn't real." The commander clenched his fists. "What happens if we refuse?" The voice answered, quiet and final. "No one refuses. Not for long." The golden light grew brighter, surrounding the crew, as the living city breathed slowly around them. The streams of light above began to descend like falling stars, reaching toward them, brushing their faces with something that wasn't touch but memory. They saw flashes, images of distant worlds, creatures of light, endless black oceans between galaxies. It was too much. Too big, too alien. And in that unbearable brightness, one truth became painfully clear. This was not the end of the rescue mission. This was the beginning of something humanity could never turn away from. The question was no longer whether they would follow. It was whether they would still be themselves after they did. The light was everywhere. It didn't shine like a star or burn like a flame. It surrounded them, warm, cold, silent, alive. The crew stood on the platform inside the living city, their hearts pounding as the glowing rivers of light above slowly descended toward them. The streams carried shapes that were almost human, but not quite anymore. Faces flickered like memories caught in water. Some were calm, some smiling, some simply drifting like they belonged to something larger. Commander Rian stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. He recognized some of those faces. People from EOS 5, the colonists. The girl floated in the air at the center of the platform. She was no longer a child. Her body was still small, but her presence was enormous. The glow around her pulsed in perfect rhythm with the living city. Her voice echoed, not through the air, but directly inside their heads. "You asked the stars if someone would answer," she said softly. "Now you stand inside the answer." The golden light wrapped around the rescue ship like threads, lifting it slightly above the surface. The city was closing in around them, not like a trap, but like a hand closing gently around water. One of the soldiers gritted his teeth. "We're not staying here," he shouted, even though his voice trembled. "We're going back to our world." But the living floor beneath him shifted like a wave, holding him in place without force. The light didn't fight him. It simply didn't let him go. The voice returned, calm and vast. "There is no back. You came forward. Forward is the only path." Ryan clenched his fists. "What are you?" he shouted into the empty air. "Why did you take them?" "They were ready," the voice answered. "You are still asking questions that were answered long before your kind learned to speak to the sky. We watched your world rise. We watched you build your machines, shout your questions into the void. You wanted a sign. We are the sign." The light pulsed brighter. The streams overhead slowed their movement, as if waiting for something to be decided. The girl lowered her head slightly, her glowing eyes locking onto Ryan's. "They're not gone," she whispered. "They're here." They chose to become part of something greater. Images slammed into Ryan's mind, thousands of glowing figures floating through endless space, connected to one another by rivers of light, a living network older than Earth itself. The colonists hadn't been erased. They had joined it. The technician fell to his knees, hands over his ears, even though no sound was hurting him. "I can feel them," he gasped. "They're in my head." "They're trying to show me everything at once." Ryan grabbed him by the shoulder. "Fight it!" But deep down he knew there was nothing to fight. This wasn't a weapon. This was contact. And contact wasn't asking for permission. The streams of light began to split. One half drifted toward the ship, wrapping it in a soft halo. The other half drifted toward the crew. The voice filled the air again, louder, slower. "Some of you will stay. Some of you will follow them home. But none of you will remain the same." The soldier who had been fighting hardest began to scream, but his voice cracked halfway. His eyes turned white as the light slid under his skin, not burning but merging. His screams turned into silence, then into a soft laugh, not human anymore. His body floated upward and dissolved into the river of light like dust. The others stumbled back, terror filling their bones. Ryan felt the light brushing against him, not pulling, not forcing. It was offering. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He thought of the colony, of the silence they had found, of the single message that started it all. This had never been a war. It had always been a door. The girl's voice grew softer, almost kind. "Every world finds the door. Not every world walks through." The pilot on the ship shouted that the engines were responding again, but the ship wasn't under their control. It hovered at the edge of the platform, aimed at the swirling tunnel of light above, the same place the colonists had vanished into. The voice whispered one final time, calm and absolute. "The path has no chains. You choose. But once you choose, you cannot unsee." Ryan stood at the center of the platform, the light sliding over his hands like warm water. His crew was breathing hard, torn between terror and awe. Behind them, the ship floated in silence, waiting for a command that would never truly be theirs again. Above them, the light pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. Patient, it wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. The commander lifted his head toward the blinding tunnel of light. And in that quiet moment, as the streams began to close around them, one truth settled like a whisper across their souls. Humanity had not just found life in the stars. It had found something far older, far greater, something that had been waiting for them. The ship began to rise. The platform folded inward. The crew vanished into the light, some screaming, some silent, some stepping forward without fear. The voice faded into the wind. Awakening has begun.